Welcome to the Nonprofits, where today we have another science episode. But this one's a little bit different because today we're going to talk about butts as well. Kara, what do you have about butts to tell us about today?
Well, I'll tell you. Scientists recently discovered a fascinating instance of two individual comb jellies fusing into a single body after realizing that one of their specimens appeared to have developed two butts. In the instance described in this article, apparently overnight, the bodies of two comb jellies had not only fused together, but also their nervous systems and digestive systems were operating as one entity. The only remaining vestiges of individuality were their transient anuses, which continued to poop independently of one another. This rare phenomenon challenges the traditional concept of what defines an individual organism, revealing the plasticity and adaptability of life forms. The study offers new insights into how organisms evolve and function when combined, building on historical experiments by those by B.R. Kuhnfield in the 1930s. And these findings contribute to our understanding of marine biology, evolutionary development, as well as transplant research. Oh, and this story is from Scientific American by Elizabeth Ann Brown on October 7th, 2024.
Thanks, Kara. Now, I've got to say that I'm going to do my best to not make this a childless rant about butts, because really the story actually had some very interesting topics to be brought up in it. One in particular for me is I have a friend who, came home from the hospital today from a liver transplant. So, understanding how risky and complicated that process is, this is definitely one of those things I thought that shed a lot of light on some potentials in that field. AJ, could you enlighten us on that?
These Franken jellies may seem like just a creepy, freaky, or even funny creature, something hard to imagine existing in the real world, right? But this discovery and the research around it could have some major implications in human medical advancements. The researchers explain that this could help scientists unravel the mystery of what's called allorecognition in humans. Just like in jellies, this process helps human bodies recognize that a body part transplanted into their bodies doesn't belong to them. And this happens by activating the immune system and triggering the rejection process. So by learning more about the exact processes that the immune system and the body use that leads to rejection could help us develop medications, procedures, or anything that can prevent or lower the rate of organ rejection in the future. And one of the researchers say that simple organisms hold clues to understanding our own complexities as well as stressors that can benefit our lives.
Thanks, AJ. I really thought that was a great quote. In fact, I was going to use that quote leading up to my next segment with Kara, but I won't have to even say it this time. But taking that quote that AJ brought up, I do think that this is also a reminder, and me personally, I was wondering how you felt on it, about how we define life and individuality in the first place. People like to put things in a box and say, this is what it means to be a person, or this is, and then they always want all these little specific, easy to fit, a one size fits all. What did you think about what that quote that AJ about simple organisms holding clues to understanding our own complexity?
Oh, I liked that quote as well. And, I think you bring up a good point too about how we really have a tendency to center human life as sort of the metric by which we measure anything else in terms of value or meaning or anything like that. And and in fact, our bodies as humans are not entirely made up of human cells. In fact, the majority of the cells in our body, we have learned, are not necessarily human. We have a lot of other critters and organisms in and on us at all times. And that is a normal state of affairs. We've learned a lot more about our microbiome in recent years. And it's even been proposed by some people that perhaps bacteria were the first species to domesticate other species, as it were. And maybe we're all going around doing just what they want us to keep them alive inside of our bodies. So, I think it's an interesting point, and a good example of an organism doing something that we don't normally think of as possible, but that suggests possibilities for what we might be able to do with technology and with additional learning for things like finding ways to prevent transplant patients from rejecting the organs that they're using and things like that, which I think is fantastic. I also think that to your earlier point, it's kind of interesting that probably the only reason we're talking about this article is because the science communicator who wrote about it in this article framed it in terms of, this is a story about this organism with two butts, and we all want to laugh and joke about the two butts and the transient anus, and that was a great strategy to get us reading about research that might otherwise seem pretty dry and uninteresting, and here we are talking about it on a podcast. So I think that was a win.
on a Halloween episode, no less. In Halloween we see spiders and bats and black cats as the mascots for spookiness. But I was not expecting a jelly with two buttholes to make the cut. But I have to say that the weirdest thing about this comb jelly isn't that it has two butts, but how they work. Okay, you mentioned earlier that they have what's called a transient anus, and this means that their anus not only forms, it only forms when they need to poop. So after they're finished defecating, the anus completely disappears. It's gone. You can't see it. Nowhere to be found. And in the study, they were saying that they injected dye into the food for the jellies, right? And they fed it to the jellies, and they realized that even though the food was going into one of the jellies' mouth, it was actually going through both of their gastrointestinal systems, and they both pooped out of the food. That even though only one of them had eaten it, so it means that their internal organs completely merged, which I thought was disgusting and creepy all at the same time.
Yeah, I've definitely thought that the idea of, I was fascinated, and I probably shouldn't admit it, but by the idea of the transient anus, where it was just, as I may have mentioned to one of you earlier, it felt like playing whack-a-mole with butts, because you just never know where it's going to show up. And I thought that was really cool, especially realizing that in spite of all the things that they had in common, they still had retained that aspect of individuality. And I couldn't help but think that I think that's an aspect of originality that as humans, many of us make sure we hold on to our ability to be a transient butt. But, that's something else entirely. Kara, did you have something you wanted to say about the whole idea of this 1930s Coonfield experiments? Did you have any perspective on that in particular?
Well, yeah, I do think it's a bit creepy, personally. And if you read up on the experiments, which I have just only done a cursory review of, it sounds as though the researchers were kind of intentionally inflicting these injuries and then actually connecting these other kinds of jellyfishes together to see if that would work and how it would work. And I find that visual imagery particularly horrifying. It reminds me of some of those horror movies where they're sewing people together. And what I think is interesting is that in the story about this article, it doesn't tell us that the researchers here intentionally injured the two jellies to see if they would fuse together. It's very vague on how this occurred. But reading some other articles about it, seemed to imply that it may have been intentional, but this article doesn't say that. So I don't know for sure. I wasn't able to find a full copy of the actual published article about this. So I will hold off on judgment there. But I think it's interesting that it was probably apparent to the writer of this article that it would be a little bit more horrifying than intended if we mentioned that this was something that was intentionally done to the jellies. And to me, that kind of brings up some questions about sort of the ethical implications of the types of studies that we do on other kinds of organisms. Of course, this one does sound like it has some very important benefits to humans in terms of the types of medical technology that we could gain from it. I can see how it, may have been approved, even if it was something that was intentionally done. But at the same time, that's just another aspect of it that kind of gives me the creeps.
Yeah, so on that topic, just like you, I had to go and look for more because it was such an interesting story. And I do remember reading on one of the articles that it said that they had actually picked up the jellies from the beach or whatever they were at in that facility and brought them into the facility, and they had gotten injured in the sort of transportation. So I don't think it was necessarily done on purpose. It is possible, you don't know. But I think the interesting thing that I learned about it was that in the 1930s, they at the same facility, they had done a very similar experiment. So it makes you wonder whether they did do it on purpose since they had already done that in the past. And it seems like another marine biologist had performed, as I said, a very similar experiment and found that there was just the result was something that was like what nightmares are made of, because it was like a sort of Franken jelly that had the bodies of 4 individual jellies with the mouth and the sensory organs and the butt of a 5th one. So it was just very, very creepy and crazy. So yeah, it really does make you wonder whether there was some intention to trying to repeat that same experiment from the 1930s. But since we have much better technology now, maybe they were trying to do some more research on the similar aspects to what they had found out back then.
Yeah, you have to consider at least the possibility, considering that's the same facility, that even though years later that these things get around, it's not like the marine biologist community is this massive multi-billion numerical people who just are all isolated. So it wouldn't surprise me. But at the same time, I did notice that the article made a comment about, but with modern day, rigorous studies and all that, it framed it as being a more modernized version and a more what we would consider modern day scientific way of doing it that perhaps was done in Coonsfield's time. Maybe not. Maybe this is just an assumption the writer of the article wanted to portray because of the squeamish factor of people going, oh, what are they doing? So we don't have anything better to do than go around abusing comb jellies, for the fun of it. But of course, this isn't really for the fun of it. But at the same time, you do bring up an important point, Kara, and that is that there is an ethics aspect here to be considered, even in what we consider a simple organism. Because the truth is, they talked about this, us learning from these simple organisms. I couldn't help but apply what an ultimately social creature. We wouldn't even think of this as being a social animal, but how much more social is it to share your own body with another person in a quite literal sense? Obviously not something that we can literally do, but what do you think it perhaps reflects, AJ, on social aspects in our species and our origin as social species? Is this an example of social species starting out?
I think that's really what's really interesting is that I believe that the reason they were studying these specific jellies is because they are the only animals that we know of so far that have this lack of allorecognition. So their bodies cannot separate whether their souls come from a different body within their own same species or not. And every other animal that we know of, including humans, have that ability to do that. And that's why we have, organ rejection. But I think that I don't know if it is exactly sort of like an adaptation, perhaps. Maybe it helps them survive. And I think that studying this very unique quality could help us humans learn a lot more about ourselves and about how we came to be this way, right? And as you said, on a more as we are a social species, this could help us with recognizing how we are individuals, like how individual we are.
Tara, I was just wondering about you because I definitely think the next time I'm talking to someone who starts talking about the superiority of humans and how they do these certain things, I would say that because these start out with wounds. These are creatures that are harmed who then work together and they both survive in this process. So I think that is very telling. What about you?
Yeah, I completely agree. One of my pet peeves is actually when people kind of talk about being a human almost as if it's the ultimate organism, and every other species is sort of defined by its differences as a deficit in comparison to the way people are. And in fact, I think that's incredibly myopic view. And I mean that in some cases quite literally, in that, human vision is not nearly as good as many other species. And yet we tend to talk about our companion animals in terms of things like, oh, well, dogs are colorblind and, this and that. But, how often do we talk about the fact that, their sense of smell is so far beyond ours that we can't even imagine what it would be like to be able to sniff the air and determine how many people were here recently and when they left and which direction they went. And, that's just one example. And this is another one where we've got an animal that in cases of injury can actually not just heal itself, but, fuse with another and continue to have all of its internal functions continue, which is incredible. So I love that we're kind of thinking about it in terms of look how cool these other organisms are and all of the things that we can learn from them, not just how are they similar to or different from us, but actually having a greater appreciation for them and their existence. And maybe even in the future, we'll start to incorporate things like considering their willingness to participate in our experiments and interventions.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that dogs being colorblind in comparison to humans and how we see ourselves as being above them, right? Because humans have only three